Hey everyone, and welcome back to Data Break by 55, the podcast where we break down the complexities of today's global marketing industry. I'm your host, Nancy Edwards, marketing lead here at 55, and your go-to wrangler for expert insights on marketing and data analytics from around the globe. Each month, we invite experts in the MarTech space to join us for a deep dive into the technical solutions that are shaping the future of businesses and marketers. From advanced measurement to generative AI, our podcast covers the latest insights and trends in the marketing industry. So sit back, relax, and take a break with us as we dive in. I'm excited to introduce our guest for today's episode titled 2024 MarTech Trends, How is GenAI Shaping the Future? We've got Hugo Laureate, Head of Data and Technology Integration at the MarTech Group, and a returning guest, Robin Clayton, who is a Managing Director at 55 US, where we help clients bridge the gap between technology and data. But before we jump in, Hugo, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background and role within the MarTech Group.
And thanks for having me. So I'm the head of data and technology integrations at the MarTech Group, which essentially means I'm responsible for designing and implementing our own roadmap across all AI use cases, and in particular, generative AI use cases. The MarTech Group includes a dozen companies today in the field of content production, media buying, influencer marketing, and data and analytics. So as you can imagine, across all these different marketing disciplines, there is a wide range of potential applications for generative AI. So my objective is to define exactly what will be critical for a marketing group tomorrow to be able to perform with generative AI, and what's the best way to organize ourselves in order to implement that roadmap in an efficient way.
Thank you, Hugo, for that awesome introduction. We're so excited to have you on today's podcast. And Robin, we're so excited to welcome you back to the podcast. For those who are listening, Robin was previously on as a guest for our data-driven transformation episode, and we're really excited to have her on here today to talk a little bit about how generative AI and emerging technology fits into the whole transformation initiative for many businesses around the world. Robin, before we jump in, I'd love to hear more about who you are and your role within 55.
Of course. Thanks, Nancy. I'm happy to be back on this podcast. I'm Robin Clayton, Managing Director here at 55 in the US. Within the MarTech Group, 55 is the data company. So you can imagine data is at the core of successfully preparing for and executing what is on that generative AI roadmap that Hugo just referenced. So when we think about how we help our clients transform, generative AI is really an accelerant in terms of what they need to plan for and really, at the end of the day, be ready to adopt in the very near future.
Great. Thank you both. We're very excited to have you today. And without further ado, let's dive into today's topic, which is all about everybody's favorite subject, generative AI, as a marketing trend for 2024. I know people have been seeing this on headlines. It was big at the beginning of the year, but today we really want to dive into how this topic of generative AI is evolving and what marketers should be expecting as we continue into 2024. So my first question for the two of you is, what has changed for marketers within the past 12 to 18 months? And how do you feel marketers have started to prepare themselves in incorporating some of these new technologies?
Well, if you think about it, like 18 months ago, ChatGPT barely existed, or maybe did not even exist. It was launched in November of 2022. GPT-4 is only 12 months old. And like 18 months ago, you had like no Gemini, pretty much no LLM. Nobody really knew what generative AI actually meant. So in 18 months, the level of sophistication and the types of use cases that are already in production is actually pretty amazing. Most of the changes happened in the content creation. So like SEO copy, emailing copy, imagery, all of that, that has been the clear focus of the first 12 to 18 months. But again, like the sophistication we have today versus what we had even like a year ago is really, really amazing.
I think on top of that, what we have today compared to a year ago is brands are really understanding that they need to pull in new stakeholders early and upfront in order to make educated decisions and informed decisions on how to evaluate this kind of new and emerging technology because it's happening so fast. It's really difficult to stay ahead of the curve. So making sure that we're starting to involve privacy and legal and figure out what types of Gen AI to adopt first, second, third within their roadmaps. And I think a lot of our clients are realizing that it's a constantly changing and potentially paralyzing landscape to navigate.
Yeah, and you bring a good point with legal and privacy considerations. I think regulators and brands have actually learned a lot from their mistakes of the past 10 years. So if you think about marketing technology and data and tracking, it took a long time for everybody to start just like enforcing rules. I mean, GDPR occurred in 2018 and like tracking was already like 20 or 25 years old. So you can tell that regulators and brands don't want to do the same mistake again. Even last year, we already had the European AI Act, which was voted, and actually it was like enacted a few days ago. In the US, we don't have a federal policy yet, but there was an executive order that has been issued by the administration like back in October or November. So very early, like just a few months after the models were out, we already had a legal framework in order to define what's okay and what's not. Can you actually use facial recognition footage for the purpose of training a model? No. Can you do emotional recognition at work? No. So I think it's really, really good to see legal teams involved early on to define what can be done, because that will help adoption in the long term and actually responsible use cases to be delivered.
You're right. There is so much excitement around this new technology, and people are jumping to see what can be done. But the ethical and responsible considerations really do need to be considered. And I love how you brought up that topic of AI governance. Hugo, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you recommend for marketers who are looking to start with establishing some AI governance around this new technology.
Well, the AI governance is really a list of requirements and guardrails around what you can do and what you are not allowed to do as an employee or as a corporation. So it includes a lot of different things, going from what model provider such as Google Gemini or OpenAI's GPT or Meta's Llama is okay to use, and what kind of use case you can have for a specific model provider. Broadly speaking, you have three areas in your AI governance policy. Number one is on the input side. So, what kind of information are you allowed to enter in a prompt? So, what can you tell the model about your company? On that piece, brands want to make sure that you don't have any leakage of proprietary or confidential information. So it's actually very critical when you use a GenAI application to make sure that none of the information you input into the model can be used to train the model or can be retrieved by a third party if they query the model. And in order to have that, you need to have specific terms and conditions brokered between the company and the model provider, or you need to make sure that when you use the provider in a certain way, they commit to not training the model with the data you have. So really the input component is key. And on the other side, the making sure that the output of the prompt, whether it's an image, a text, a video, or anything else, you want to make sure that you have the ownership over the output. And not every model provider does guarantee you that you actually have ownership over the output. And even if the model does give you that kind of certitude, you want to make sure that you add enough human level edits to the output so that you can really claim ownership. Because otherwise, especially in the US, it's not completely clear today whether a fully AI generated image can be owned by the person who prompts the model. So having a human in the loop is not only helpful in order to give guardrails to the model, it's also very helpful to ensure that you can actually claim ownership of the output.
Yes, absolutely. It definitely needs to come from that corporate level. Not just, to keep those guidelines in check, but I think also leadership can really be that bridge between the human and technology and helping kind of define what that can look like for an organization. So it's super, super important. Robin, how are you seeing clients approach this selection process and how are they executing these tools throughout the organization?
It's really important in order to build resiliency and to Hiko's point, adoption into these models and into the new tools that we're equipping our marketers and other teams within our organizations with. So for me, it's really exciting that clients are taking the time to do that due diligence upfront. Also, building on that first party data being important as cookies go away, it becomes almost more important here, I think, when we start talking about data ownership, both in terms of the first party data you're feeding in to differentiate your model from a competitor's, for example, but then also to Hugo's point on the keeping the human in the loop for the output, because making sure we have clarity into all of the checks and balances and human approval throughout and also the output itself is super critical. So it kind of goes hand in hand with making sure that you have the right data governance set up for the end-to-end process. We are seeing clients take that really, really seriously. Instead of just diving in and trying everything under the sun, we're seeing people come with a really measured approach. Honestly, seeing people start to do the foundationals right in the beginning, both in terms of data governance, but also making sure from a data collection, a data orchestration level, that they're putting those pieces in place that take into account all of the inputs to their ecosystem, whether it's in the beginning of the marketing cycle, consumer insights, or maybe it's social coming in. So all of these inputs that you could possibly feeding into the model, taking a really broad, systematic view and making sure step by step nothing is missed, super critical to get the data right.
Yeah, one build on the measured approach taken by client, I'm really amazed to see how careful brands are when they plan to use generative AI, especially when you compare with the optimistic slash bullish approach that brands always had with like marketing technology. In marketing technology, it has always been like, if technically you can stitch together those two identities, then let's try it. And we're going to like create a
Yeah.
profile and append like yet another attribute in case it's going to be useful one day.
Yeah.
And only after a few years, you realize that maybe it was not helpful and maybe it was not really required and it was probably creepy. Right now, again, like the primary use case for a marketer is image generation or copy generation. But for image generation, you can then do like a lot of different things, and the technology is actually good enough to almost create print ad from scratch, like do campaign ideation and create something out of the blue. However, many brands don't want to do that because, for example, they don't want to show a body or a human person in a copy or in an ad, just because they don't want to be blamed for putting people jobless or having like creating synthetic people on an ad. So when you look at the guidelines in the GenAI policy from large enterprise, usually you will have things around only use GenAI for stock imagery, or only use AI for background, or only show a hand, or only show just like a piece of a person, but nothing recognizable, just because we want to make sure that we remain very careful with the potential backlash we can get out of it.
As an optimist, that makes me feel also in the same vein, really positive about companies' prioritization of the use cases. So content, obviously, to Hugo's point, it's like the killer use case. It's so obvious. You can basically create a print from scratch, but it opens you up to like copyright, to DII risks, like all these other things when you're out in the public eye. So internal use cases that maybe open companies up to less risk, but are game changers in terms of time savings or efficiency or quality optimization. Those types of use cases, I think, are important to prioritize when you're thinking about your Gen AI roadmap, because you can make sure you have the right level of internal governance and safety controls and keeping the human along the way and pressure test that and make sure you get it right before you start doing some of these riskier use cases, which could open you up to making some mistakes.
Yeah. One funny thing is because creative image generation is the killer use case now, it puts the creatives at the forefront of a technical revolution. And in the past 15 years, the cool scientists were like the media traders and the CRM guys. So creatives were still very reluctant to any technical change to the art of designing the right imagery. And now they have to lead the organization into something even more groundbreaking and even more important from a technical revolution perspective. And you can tell within the team that you have like two different types of organization. You have organizations where like the creative teams really embrace the change and they don't see that as a way to undermine or level down the quality of their work. But you still have organizations where GenAI is sidelined to like content production, trends creation, like the low level, high quantity part of creativity, while the big idea remains like the things that only humans can do. But I find it like pretty interesting to see like a shift in who has to lead the revolution in clients' organization.
You're so right. The creative teams are on the front lines of this revolution, which can be a really hard place to be, as you're shouldering that responsibility and figuring out how to work with the tools instead of against them. Echoing what you both said earlier, it really is about coming back to that foundation of data because artificial intelligence isn't really new. Marketers have been using AI for a long time, but generative AI is what's evolving and what's coming into this space and changing the way that we're doing things. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, Hugo, about the difference between AI and generative AI and how that foundation of data is really what powers both of those pieces.
Sure. So you're right. Generative AI is a subdiscipline of AI. And usually you can break down AI into fields. You have generative AI, which is all about generating like a set of tokens. So you generate text or you generate imagery or you generate video. On the other side of the spectrum, you will have more like predictive AI and models that will aim at telling you the likelihood of a consumer to purchase a product in the next 30 days or the likelihood of churn of a specific client or the likelihood of a click or like doing forecasting model, all that stuff. But the reality is those two disciplines need to get intertwined. And that's not the reality today, honestly. Right now, we have like two different tracks that are parallel. But tomorrow, we can think as the evolution of generative AI with the creation of what we call generative AI agents. So AI agents would be autonomous entities that can interact with humans with generative AI in order to understand a specific task. And they can then take different paths, different routes based on what the end user wants to do. And those generative AI agents will be able to pick specific ML models, so traditional AI models, in order to perform the task. They could ask a model to generate a forecast, and based on the result of the forecast, they could use generative AI again in order to create a set of specific creatives that would allow you to maximize the number of visits in order to like get to the forecast. So like this recursive loop of Gen AI, a traditional ML model, then the result of the traditional ML model gets back to a generative AI task is really something that will take off in the next 2 years, I think.
I love as a type of person, right? You're learning in university, half the battle is picking the right model and making sure you do the training the right way, but making sure that the model you pick fits the data and everything correctly. Otherwise, your results won't be as good. And the idea of evolving this much to a place where you can have agents picking in real time the right model and then building that model pretty much just kind of blows my mind.
But it's reflecting. You have a heated debate these days between optimists who think those autonomous AI agents are around the corner and people who say that they are like, I mean, they might never exist or they will maybe be available in like 3, 5, 10 years. And
Yeah.
that's the entire like debate around like artificial general
Yeah.
intelligence or AGI. But what I find interesting is, again, like the shift in paradigm for a traditional ML engineer. When you train a model and when you create an ML model in production, you have to be very clear what are the input parameters and what are the output parameters. In a generative AI paradigm, the parameters are generated by the AI. So you have to be able to actually tune the ML model with the result of a chat between a user and an AI, and the ability to call the right model with the right parameters based on how an AI is capable of understanding a conversation is really, really hard. And honestly, today, it's not really possible yet at scale. In some examples it is, but most of the time it's not. But it's very likely again that in the next year or so, you will have like mind-blowing applications for that.
And I feel like that's where the data ownership, the first party data, and not just the data, but the understanding of the agent or the generative AI of your business is so key.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And again, like first party data has a very narrow definition today. Like when you ask a marketer, what is first party data? They will likely say it's information that is proprietary to my organization, but usually it's a big database of cookies and emails and attributes. And you can use those attributes for media targeting or measurement. That's usually how first party data is collected, stored, and utilized. But in the context of generative AI, first party data is much broader. It's all the information you have about your brand, your market positioning, your consumer. So it also includes all of the unstructured data that brands have collected for decades, consumer panels, quantitative and qualitative research. All that data today is not utilized in a very efficient way for planning and targeting. Tomorrow, with generative AI, you will have a way to sift through a large number of PDF documents, extract only the most relevant information about a specific audience group, push that into an LLM, get additional insights about a specific consumer group in a specific market, and then map it with like an audience group that you can actually target in media. And that's really something that can create a huge competitive advantage for a brand if they are able to do it first. But in order to be able to do that, you have to not only collect, organize, and extract the data from the system, you have to decouple, if you want, the generative AI application, like so the system that will allow you to create text or image, with the system that will sift through the document and pass the right information. So that's what we call like brand brains or brand seeds. So it's actually brand-owned cloud environments where you have pipelines that will, again, acquire, organize, extract, embed, and retrieve information from documents and pass them to specific LLMs. This is called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. So it's a well-documented field of generative AI, which is really booming. It's already pretty well established today. And I really recommend brands to investigate what they should do on that field, because again, that's one of the best way to take advantage of GenAI today.
That's great for brands historically that maybe haven't had as much luck or ability to collect the narrow definition of first party data. So it could be a game changer for those types of companies.
Yeah, I mean, it is like, I mean, how many times have we been working with CPG brands who are like automotive brands who have a hard time getting first party data about their user just because they are intermediated by a retailer or by a car dealership. For GenAI, if you have market research, you have a competitive advantage. So it's really, really a huge opportunity for those brands to do amazing things that D2C brands might have a harder time deliver.
You mentioned that these tools need to build upon the right data and have the right infrastructure. I'm curious to know, from a marketing perspective, what skills or tools do you feel like marketers need to have in order to best leverage this new technology?
I think a marketer, department head, et cetera, who understands the types of tools available to them and how that fits in to otherwise the typical objectives within their role, is going to be really key, because the companies who are able to do that, grasp that, and then act on it are going to be propelled quite quickly, I think, in front of the rest of the pack. And the good news, this is pretty accessible in terms of what the focus area is really the basics on data foundationals, the collection, the orchestration, cleaning the data, extracting the data. All those things are things that companies can do, and most of them do today. So If you can couple those things and you understand broadly the vision where you need to go and how to pull the pieces together, it's really accessible for companies to start getting ready and doing that today.
Awesome, Robin. Thank you. Well, that wraps up all the questions I had for today. But is there anything else you would like to say to our audience?
Well, I'm really looking forward for additional use cases on paid media specifically. I have the feeling that it has been like the poor man's of GenAI for now, because it has been all about creating ads, all about customer service, to some extent like analytics, but we haven't seen that many killer use cases on paid media. I mean, paid media is so focused on losing the third-party cookie signal and trying to find an alternative, so focused on being able to work with the media platforms that through traditional AI disintermediate them. So like all the performance max, the advantage plus. So I mean, the focus of paid media, to make it short, is AI in general. But you could think of potentially very interesting use cases for GenAI for like contextual targeting, for example. I mean, contextual targeting and GenAI are supposed to be working very easily together because it's all about understanding the tone of voice and the context of like a specific, like typically web pages. You can think of use cases on understanding the performance of your campaign. So having an assistant that can tell you in the morning what you should look at across your 5 or 10 different channels, identifying spikes, identifying errors, identifying like unusual performance that helps you spot immediately what to look at and what to correct. These are a good example of what GenAI can do. But I don't think there has been enough investment or focus yet on those applications, but it's likely going to come.
Thank you both. It's been incredible to talk to you today, to be able to speak with experts who live and breathe these types of topics every single day and who are seeing from brands big and small how generative AI is really shaping the industry. So thank you both so much for your time. Before I can really let you go, I need to know, what are some tips that you would give to marketers who are looking to stay abreast on these topics and improve their own skill set?
Well, read. I mean, that's always been my advice. I mean, reading, documenting yourself is critical. The good news is, to Robin's point, there is a lot of material around. So like, I'm really amazed at how much you can learn easily by going to like, even like LinkedIn. You have like a ton of material. You have amazing podcasts that are available and will give you like a good understanding, technical or not, of the landscape. You have like Deep Learning AI, which is like an amazing platform where you can actually register to pretty advanced webinars or workshops. So there is no excuse for not knowing what's going on. I mean, the only excuse you have is time, but the information is there. It's like a revolution that is here to stay. So especially if you are a junior marketing practitioner, I mean, you should definitely like go ahead and like embrace it, because it's going to give you a competitive advantage in your career.
Yeah, the ability to access this type of learning and information is really democratized right now, and you can get it on so many different channels. Personally, I follow Hugo's LinkedIn because I really like all his posts and I feel like I learn a lot, and then I can figure out where I want to go after. So good to read or listen about the technicality of the models, but also it's good to take a step back and, I don't know, Wall Street Journal, like hear how the market is reacting and what other people are doing. So I think it's important to have maybe a few different lenses. So think about maybe the macro view, industry, what's happening, like how are businesses, the market, how is that reacting? Maybe on a middle level, what's the latest with Meridian? Who are the big players? What are they doing? But then, yeah, at the more practitioner and then also tech level. So considering those dimensions, I think when you read about it, depending what your role is or what your objective is, it's a good way to think about it.
Thank you, Robin. That's great insight. Well, that's all we have for today. But if you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to Data Break anywhere you like to get your podcast. And be on the lookout for a new episode next month. Before we go, Hugo, can you share for our listeners where they can find out more about the BrandTech Group or hear more news about what you're doing with generative AI and other technologies?
Yes, you go to the bromtechgroup.com and you will have all the information about the companies we have, And we have also amazing content available all the time on LinkedIn. So don't be a stranger. Feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Hugo. And for 55, you can find us on LinkedIn. You can also check out our blog titled The Tea House, which offers a place to learn, ask questions, and browse the latest brand tech insights from our 55ers. Until our next data break, stay curious, stay data-driven, and continue exploring the world of marketing and data analytics.
Thanks so much, Nancy.
Thanks so much.
Bye.